as much as we're told, like, oh, don't have a pity party for yourself, I say get the hat. Like, get like a little banner, like get a horn. Like, it doesn't matter because it's your pity party. You're going through what you're going through. And to get out of the pity party so often, I think, is so everyone else can feel better. But it's not necessarily about making yourself feel better, because if you're still in whatever that emotion is, then you're still in it.
You're listening to The Creative Imposter, episode number 86. Welcome to The Creative Imposter, episode 86. Today's episode is a surprise. I did not intend to make this an episode of the podcast at all, but when I had Monica RIvera from the podcast You Want to Do What on Facebook Live in The Creative Imposter, it was just too good and too perfect for our series on voice to pass it up. Now, because I did not mean to make it an episode, I wasn't using my fantastic fancy podcasting mic. I opted instead for better sunlight for the video than what I was getting in my podcasting room. And Monica wasn't using her fancy podcast mic either, so the sound will be a little different than what you might be used to on this show. But that is totally okay because we talked about two very important things: giving a TEDx talk and loneliness. Or more specifically, how to become your own best friend. Two very strong topics in such a short 20-minute time span. This conversation is packed with valuable ideas and insights for you. This talk was part of our brand new online media club hosted exclusively in the Creative Imposter group on Facebook. It's free to join. The link, of course, is in the show notes at thecreativeimposter.com/086 for episode 86, or you can just search for The Creative Imposter on Facebook. Of course, I would love to see you there. The more community members we can have on the conversation in the club, the better. Every month, I'm choosing a former guest or community member who has recently created some outstanding piece of media, a book, a video, a blog, music, a talk, a podcast, etc., that we can all get online for free or for a small fee. I'll share the thing with you. You check it out. And then we get that creator on a Facebook Live sometime during the month to discuss behind the scenes of their creative process and answer community questions. This current month upcoming, November 18th, we are connecting with Charlotte Alea, author of the new book, To Be Worthy, available through Amazon and linked in the show notes for this episode. Charlotte has also been on The Creative Imposter twice, episodes 85 and 34, so be sure to check those out. Monica RIvera, today's guest, also has been on the podcast before, episode 70. And today we are discussing her recent TEDx talk, The Flip Side of Loneliness, which you can watch for free via YouTube. Or if you're like me and YouTube isn't your thing and you'd rather stick with podcasts, fear not. Pause this episode right now. Pop over to You Want to Do What and choose her recent episode from October 30th, 2019 called TEDx Talk, The Flip Side of Loneliness, and you can listen in podcast form. Seriously. Go listen to it now, and then come back over here and finish listening to this one. I'll wait. Okay, are you back? What did you think of Monica's talk? Did it resonate with you? I have one more invitation for you before we get to the heart of our live chat with Monica. Episode 100 of The Creative Imposter is coming spring 2020, and I need your help. I'd love to get your voice and your story on the show in honor of the 100th episode. Here's how. Pop over to thecreativeimposter.com/title list, and you will see all of the titles of all of the interview episodes I have ever done on the show. Each one is phrased as an action, something you can apply to your creative life and work. Choose one episode title as a prompt, and then share with me how that phrase has applied to you. It could be the actual episode itself, something that really resonated with you, or just the phrase, even if you haven't listened to that particular episode. What I'm looking for is a specific moment in your life or work that stands out to you that aligns with that phrase, something that you changed, an aha moment, a situation where you felt like a total imposter, a time you crashed and burned and picked yourself back up, a time you said screw it and let yourself soar. Just a short story, 100 to 250 written words in an email, or 3 to 5 minutes recorded as an MP3 on your computer, or even a voice memo on your phone. Don't worry about editing. If you mess up, just send me your raw recording and I will totally edit for you. This is my way of hearing what works or doesn't for you as a creative and sharing that with the rest of our community, because I promise you, if something has happened for you that was meaningful, it could be just what someone else needs to hear right now in this moment. In your written or recorded story, you can include your name, your website, or favorite social media handle, or just ask me to share it anonymously. Send me your story or your recording to Andrea@thecreativeimposter.com. Subject line episode 100. Send it by January 1st so I can compile and edit just in time for spring. Are you in? Awesome. And now, are you ready? The flip side of loneliness and how to give a TEDx talk with Monica RIvera. When did you get the idea that you wanted to do a TEDx talk, and how did that happen?
Yeah, for sure. So first, I just want to say thank you for inviting me into your community. I really appreciate it. So thank you just for giving me the time and the platform to connect with you. And it's nice to be able to do that. But yes, you're right. The TEDx thing was something that was a goal of mine. I probably had it on my list of goals for about 18 months. And I spent last year sort of kind of casually applying to different events that I would see pop up. And I always knew I had this idea of the type of talk I wanted to give, but it wasn't as structured. It was just an idea. And for 18 months, I kind of, like I said, very sporadically sort of searched around places in 2018, applying to things here and there and getting a lot of no's. And I thought, well, I think this idea is really good, but maybe I'm not packaging it the right way. And that was kind of really the process for me. I had the seed of the idea. I have a goal. I knew that the message was important to share and also very timely, but I was having trouble connecting the dots.
How did you come up with that topic? Why that message?
Sure. So the talk is called The Flip Side of Loneliness, and it addresses what I deem my cure for loneliness, which in a nutshell, I believe is an inside job. It really starts internally. I feel like a lot of the information that we receive is very externally focused, like join a meetup, get a community, and like all of these solutions that are provided that are, in my opinion, quick fix tips, that it doesn't necessarily address maybe the root cause of loneliness. And for me, I suffered from loneliness a really long time because when I was 16, I watched my mom die in front of me. And in the next 7 years, all of my family members passed away. So I'm an only child. If you listen to my podcast, You Want to Do What? You hear me refer to my nieces, but my nieces aren't my bio nieces. They are really close friends that had daughters that I almost immediately attached to or imprinted on. If you've ever seen Twilight, I kind of feel like I imprinted onto these little girls, and they feel as close to family biologically as they possibly could. But the truth is, since I was in my early 20s, I haven't had any family. And that has been something difficult for me to admit. I do address in the talk that for the first time, a lot of people in my life have never heard these stories before and never heard me speak about this because I carried a lot of shame in not having a family, and I didn't want people to think that I was weak or have pity towards me, but I was really lonely, and I created a life for myself that was about doing things that filled me up on the inside. And it was really my journey of really testing and experimenting and being curious about what can I do to heal this loneliness within me without necessarily seeking it from other people. So this is 20 years of tried and true in the making to kind of get to this place of why I felt equipped to give the talk I did.
Yeah. What do you think it was about the way that you packaged and presented it that it finally got accepted?
Yeah, so I think it's really important for everyone to humble yourself to know that what you don't know is really important, right? So the reason I don't know what I don't know exists is because it's true. And I realized that one of my areas of improvement, I won't call it a weakness, my area of improvement was that I just wasn't great at pitching. And so one of the things that any TED event looks for is like a consistent through line in what your talk is going to be about. And what I found is, after working with someone, I'll talk about that in a minute, is that it's almost like I compare it to taking a photograph. So if I have any photographers that are listening, you'll resonate with this. So when you come up with a composition for a photo, you want to know first what you want the person to look at when they see your photo, like the primary thing that they're going to look at. And if you have a photo that has a tree and a flower and a person sitting on a bench and a child playing in the background, it might seem like a pretty photo, but it's not the best photo because there's too many things going on. So you might look at the child in the background. I might look at the person sitting on the bench. Someone else is going to look at the flower. There's not a clear focal point. And so when establishing your talk and coming up with your idea, you want to make sure it has a really strong primary focus and maybe a small secondary piece. So I'm going to talk to you about X, and I'm going to prove it through Y. And so that's very important to be consistent in that. And I felt like I was missing that piece when I was trying to pitch myself. So what I did instead is, and it's funny how life happens and you have to pay attention to signs from the universe and all these things. So last year in October, I had saw someone on Instagram who was talking about TED Talks, and she had given 2 TED Talks and was working with other people. And I sat down and had a conversation with this woman, and I didn't feel like it resonated. She seemed like a great person, but in terms of having that personal, this is someone I want to tell my story to and ask for help to kind of create it, I didn't feel like we had like that connection. So I kind of let it go. And then, as you know, I had gallbladder surgery. That was an emergency. And so that kind of knocked me on my butt. And while I'm home on my butt, not really able to do much because I'm in pain, I get an email from some random person, have no idea how I got on their email list, for a TED Talk speaker. And so I reached out to her. Her name is Sinette Stevens, and we worked together on creating the pitch. And she's had over 100 people that have done TED Talks. And what I learned from her is what I shared before, having that very consistent through line, and also a 1-minute audition tape. So in addition to just having the form filled out, if you have a 1-minute video where you can concisely say what your talk is about and why it's important for you to be the person to give it, those are 2 powerful things that in conjunction will get you on that TED stage.
That's awesome. In preparing to give the talk, besides honing your message and distilling that down, did you practice? What did you do?
Oh my gosh. So I did so many things. So I'm very type A, so I'll just put that out there. So that already comes with a whole bunch of neuroses and things kind of going into it. I admit it. I own it. It's cool. I accept that about myself. But I wrote the talk first. And not only did I write the talk, but I kind of kept going back and sort of fine-tuning the stories that I wanted to include in there, consistently going back to make sure the message kind of stayed on track, because it could easily, because my talk starts about revealing when my mom passed away and getting that phone call, I wanted to make sure that the talk was still about loneliness and not just about grief. Mm-hmm. And so I wanted to make sure that whoever was listening to it or watching it on YouTube felt like this talk can be for me, because chronic loneliness is a worldwide epidemic. And that's the primary message that I'm trying to deliver in the talk. And it comes in all different forms. For me, it was grief, but I wanted that to be the driver. So as I wrote the talk, I wanted to make sure I was continuing to come back to that piece, as opposed to having it go off on tangents. Maybe it was about grief, maybe it was about something else. So that was important for me to kind of keep double checking and really linking into the main thread. The second thing I just want to say in terms of practice, I probably practiced the talk about 200 times. That's not an exaggeration. I made sure I practiced walking around so I could feel the talk in my body. And for me, it was important as if when you hear your favorite song come on and you just instinctively know the words, the radio could go out and you could continue to sing along with it. That's how well I wanted to know the talk, that it was in my bones. And so that required a lot of practice and a lot of crazy situations that I created for myself so that I would still be able to stay on track.
That is so smart and makes total sense. So recently on The Creative Imposter, we had someone named Rob Biesenbach on, and he also is an actor who he had a corporate background first and then started acting and doing improv. And now he works with training and coaching people who are in corporate to have better, more compelling talks and presentations and things like that. And the idea of rehearsing and physically getting it into your body is so key. I mean, you probably were nervous on the day, yes or no?
Yeah, I was nervous on the day because a lot of things that I couldn't control were actually going wrong. So, for example, the first person to speak, their mic went out in the middle of them speaking. So you could hear a pop in the audience. Literally, right before I went on, the light blew out. Right before I went onto stage. So there was kind of that happening. There was only one mic when there was supposed to be 3 mics. So maybe 15 seconds before I go on, I have people literally shoving their hands up the back of my dress to try to connect the mic and make sure that that's on. So there's all these things that are sort of happening around me that I had no control over, which is really tough. Again, type A, really tough to kind of do. But I kept telling myself, the only thing you can control today is you going out there and giving this talk. The thing that made me most nervous, and maybe this will resonate with some of your community, is that I like to speak when I know no one. And this is kind of really strange. When it's people that I know, that makes me nervous. When it's strangers, I'm oddly not nervous at all. And so I did invite people to the talk. And so the whole first row was filled with like my loving community of people. And I didn't want to look at them. So I had to take the first row so that I can look out and not down. But as I start to say the first paragraph of my talk, which is about my mom, as I referenced, a friend that I had invited had actually been there when I had received the call from my grandfather to say that my mom was dying. And I didn't think to mention it to him ahead of time, like, I'm going to talk about this. So in the very beginning, it appears that I'm nervous, but I actually, from the corner of my eye, see him, and he was crying. Oh. And I wasn't expecting that reaction. Yeah. And he wasn't expecting that I was going to share that because he knows how privately I've held those stories in. And so that was the moment where I'm thinking, stay on topic, make sure you remember what you have to say, but also, oh my gosh, my friend is crying. Why didn't I think to say something ahead of time? So there was that duality that was happening probably within the first minute.
Wow. You had mentioned wanting to make sure that the talk really focused on loneliness, and that for you, grief was sort of the way into that realization of loneliness or that feeling. And I resonate with that because when I watched the talk, I haven't experienced losing that many family members like so early on and so close to me. I have experienced grief, obviously, I think we all have, but I didn't necessarily resonate as much with that part of it, though I felt like, sympathy for you in that story. But the loneliness piece, I really resonated with when I started my first business, which was a yoga studio in Chicago. And, when you're used to having so many work friends and colleagues, and then you start your own business and you're working by yourself and you have people who work for you, but it's kind of like different than having colleagues. Mm-hmm. And I was tired a lot. I was working a lot. I was broke. Mm-hmm. And, some of my old relationships or friendships sort of like fell away because we couldn't relate to each other anymore because I was off on this different path that they didn't really understand. And I didn't have my new like entrepreneurial friends yet.
Right.
And so there was this deep feeling of being alone. And it's actually one of the reasons why I started this group, which started as a meetup group in Chicago before it was a Facebook group, which started way before I had a podcast or anything like that, which was just as a way to connect with other women who were doing creative things. And so that feeling of like, if I want to go out and eat, I'm going to have to go out on my own, or if I want to go see a movie, I might now be able to do it in the middle of the afternoon on a Tuesday, but who else is available in the middle of the afternoon on a Tuesday to go see a movie? Whereas my evenings and weekends were busy with my particular business. And so I think that you were really successful in keeping it focused on that loneliness piece. The question came from Courtney, and she said that in the talk, you mentioned, quote, meeting yourself where you are. Mm-hmm. And she says, this is great advice, but how do you strike the balance between allowing time for grief and processing without spiraling into a pity party, how do you know when it's time to push yourself out of your comfort zone again?
That's a great question. I always have said that I feel the way to get through anything is to actually go through it, not to try to go around it or underneath it or any of those things. So I'm a big believer, and this is just for me, that you have to really go through it. Because I think oftentimes you'll hear people say, distract yourself or find these other things that kind of, keep your focus elsewhere. But the pain is still there. And so I have this line where I say within the talk is loneliness is felt in the dark when you're falling asleep or when you first wake up in the morning. And regardless of how busy you make yourself or whatever sort of doodads or fidget spinners or like anything you want to occupy yourself with, at the end of the day, in those moments, you can't cheat yourself out of the thoughts you have with yourself in those quiet moments. So for me, I say if you're in a place, whether it is you're grieving or when you, Andrea, was starting your business and you felt very lonely, or I also received a text message from someone that I'd known since elementary school that said, I'm a mom and I feel lonely all the time. And I would have never thought that she would feel lonely. She has amazing children, a big family, a relatively new child. Seems like everything is great, right? Because life on social media is curated to look like everything is great all the time. And I would have never thought that. And she said, I've had to work so hard to become my own best friend in these past years because I feel so lonely. And that really knocked me on my butt because I wouldn't have thought that. So to answer the question from Courtney, I feel like pity parties, as much as we're told like, oh, don't have a pity party for yourself, I say get the hat. Like get like a little banner, like get a horn. Like it doesn't matter because it's your pity party. You have to look at it as you're going through what you're going through. And to get out of the pity party so often I think is so everyone else can feel better. But it's not necessarily about making yourself feel better because if you're still in whatever that emotion is, then you're still in it. So pretending is for other people. It's not because you're still, again, feeling that emotion, but you want everyone else to think that you're okay. I had a friend who I'd been friends with my entire life. And after my dad passed away, and he was one of the last people in my life to pass away, she said, I'd known her my whole life. I can't be friends with you anymore because you're too sad all the time. And that was deeply hurtful. Like we'd known each other literally. We were born 2 months and 2 days apart, lived 2 floors away from each other our whole lives. And that was the end of it. In that one sentence, that was the end of our friendship. And so was I supposed to make myself feel better so that I could retain that friendship? Or did I have to realize that maybe my journey doesn't include her in it anymore? So I do agree that there's this period of time where you don't want to spend too much time in bed or you don't want to spend too much time having the ice cream. And I talk about that too, like limitless amounts of chocolate. And I love chocolate. So trust me, I can go deep into chocolate before I decide I want to pivot. But I think for me, I just woke up one day and said, I needed to shift. And it's about being patient with yourself, because if you try to springboard yourself into a place where you're not ready to be, you will inevitably come right back to where you need to go and do the work. And that's the best thing that I can say is give yourself time. It's your journey. It's not anyone else's. And as someone who experienced this, and like I said, 20 years of sort of going through it, kind of figuring out what works for me and other people, because you still have to play nice in the world with other people, all of those things, kind of acknowledging that, is that it still is about you and kind of meeting yourself where you are, grieving, feeling, healing, and understanding that and recognizing it. And maybe that means you do go out with your friends and you do socialize and you meet other people. But the days that you don't feel it, the days where that emotion feels heavier, then honor that and respect that and say, today's the day I'm going to say no to this. And I'm just going to sit with where I am and maybe do something for me that makes me feel good on my own and not force myself to pretend to be something that I'm not today.
That is so awesome. I think that's really spot on. Any closing thoughts that you have for us?
I did want to say something more on the tactical side of speaking for folks. And I think this applies whether or not you're thinking of TED or TEDx or any other event. But also bounce your ideas off of someone else. So for me, once I had the talk written and I thought, okay, I think this is where it is, I shared it with people, but well in advance of the event, because this is the key. Share it well in advance of the event. And what I did was I gauged people's reactions to see, okay, are they laughing here? Are they nodding here? Are they with me in these certain parts? And so there was some stories that I removed because they just, regardless of what group I spoke to, it wasn't hitting in the way that I wanted it to hit. And so you have to acknowledge that, okay, this talk is for you, but it's also for your audience. What do you want your audience to get out of it? So feel okay if it's not a personal thing. If like, well, I thought this story was hilarious and no one laughed, I'm going to keep it in anyway. No, maybe that story was funny to you, but it's not there for everyone else. And it's okay to remove that. So I would say do that, but do it in advance, because I did have a fellow speaker who, about a week before the event and before we went live on stage, ran through this with her friends, and her friends completely trashed the entire talk. Oh. Like just tore it to shreds, and she ended up rewriting the entire thing a week before. To me, I told my friends when it was that late in the game and I was reciting the talk to them, I need you to learn to love this talk like you love me, because it's too late in the game now. So you've learned to love me, learn to love the talk. I just need for you to add a girl in and just be there and support me, because a week before is just way too intense. It's a lot of pressure for you. But if you give yourself a longer runway, you can test it out with people, see if it's resonating with them, and then take out the pieces that aren't. And then the parts that are playing well, maybe you could think about expanding, or you feel more confident going in to know, I'm approaching this section of the talk. This should feel really well with the audience, and you can have some more confidence.
One of my favorite moments in the talk is early on when you were talking about how when you were experiencing this grief and people were like trying to offer you advice on how to feel better. And they're like, here's an inspiring quote. And you did get a laugh from the audience in that moment. And I was like, that was such a good moment, because it just alleviated a little bit of, you know, the tension, and also was very authentic, because I think a lot of us can relate to that. Oh, inspiring quote to cheer you up. No.
Right, exactly. And so something that's actually funny is while I was rehearsing for this, I get a text message from an old boss, and he's like, hey, you know, I'd love to get together and meet. And I was like, yes, for sure. I'm in the middle of prepping for this TEDx talk. If it's not anything too urgent, I'd love to meet you afterwards. And he says, sure. And he responds with a meme that says, hang in there. And he has no idea that I have this in my talk. And I thought, oh my God, this is so perfect. But I hope he's not offended when he sees it, because it was already in the talk. But that's kind of the point. Yeah. You get a lot of hang in there memes with the cat hanging on the tree. So I had to include it.
Hilarious.
That was Monica RIvera on her TEDx talk, The Flip Side of Loneliness. And if you still haven't watched it, I know you want to now. And if you haven't listened to her podcast, you want to do what? You're probably going to have to click over to her show and tap subscribe or follow if you're on Spotify. Remember to join the Creative Imposter Facebook group and pick up Charlotte Alea's book, To Be Worthy, to join our November online media club. And find my interview episode title list so that you can be part of our episode 100 celebration. All of these resources are linked for you in the show notes at thecreativeimpostor.com/086. And this episode, as always, was mixed by Edwin Ruiz at Mondo Machine. Our theme music is by Jovia Armstrong. I thank you so much for listening, and this week I hope you find the right stage, medium, or platform to tell your story.